My name is Kit Goodwin, and I'm president of the Friends of UT Libraries Friends Group, and I'm so pleased to see all of you tonight. This is going to be a great program. And I also see a number of guests out there. You have to pardon me, I have new glasses. Y'all know how that is when you get new glasses. Can't see with them, can't see without them. Anyway, we are pleased to have the guests tonight. And you are in with a really good group, and I want you to know that the Friends is made up of a group of people from Arlington and North Central Texas that are supporting the UTA libraries and the university itself as well. We hope that if you're interested enough to come back again, you'll pick up a brochure outside. We'd love to have you come back and be a part of the membership here at the university. Tonight we're in for a double treat. Not only do we have our scheduled speakers, which you see of the names up on the screen there, but we are also showcasing one of the most important aspects of what the Friends do here at this university, and that's to show you tonight the presentation of the McNair Scholarship Awards. To get us started on that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Joan Reinhardt, who is the director of the McNair Scholars Program. Joan?
Well, good evening, everyone. As director of the UTA McNair Scholars Program and also a member of the Friends of the UTA Library, I am pleased to attend this evening's meeting and speak very briefly about the McNair Scholars Program. The Ronald E. McNair Post-Baccalaureate Achievement Program, which is actually the rather lengthy and official title for this program, was created by Congress in 1988, and it was named for Dr. Ronald E. McNair, who tragically perished with his fellow astronauts on a second mission aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986. As a young African American from a modest family in South Carolina, Ronald McNair followed his dream of a career in science. As an undergraduate, he attended North Carolina A&T University and then proceeded to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he earned his PhD in physics at the age of 26. That's pretty impressive, I think. Dr. McNair was also attracted to spaceflight. He subsequently applied to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and was selected to train as a mission specialist for future shuttle flights. Congress created the McNair Scholars Program, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Education, not simply to honor Dr. McNair for his many accomplishments, but also to encourage others to reach for equally challenging goals. The intent of the program was to work primarily with undergraduates, either from moderate income and first generation, or ethnically underrepresented backgrounds, to better prepare them for graduate study, culminating in the PhD and a career in university teaching. The UTA McNair Scholars Program works with a minimum of 32 students each year from a wide range of majors. It is open to U.S. citizens or permanent residents with strong academic records and excellent letters of recommendation from faculty members. The McNair Scholars Program came to UTA in 1990, and since then it has provided its participants with seminars on a variety of topics, including the graduate school application process, also GRE prep classes, conference travel opportunities, and of course a summer research internship. The latter encompasses both the spring and the summer semesters, and each scholar is guided by a faculty mentor during this process. The students receive a stipend and also a scholarship, so that 3 credit hours of independent study goes on their transcript. And it concludes with a paper and an oral presentation each year on campus in early August. And each year, the Friends of the UTA Library McNair Scholarship Committee members attend all of the research presentations. And last year, there were 17. So this is an all-day affair. And their reviews, of course, their assessments of the presentations and actually the written papers in addition, determine the awards that will be made this evening. Over the years, the McNair graduates have earned their degrees, their post-baccalaureate degrees from many different institutions, not only UTA, but also recently we had a doctorate in epidemiology from UNT Health Science Center, from Indiana University, University of Pennsylvania, Southern Methodist University, Rice University, and really public and private institutions throughout the United States. And lastly, of course, I would like to thank the Friends of the UTA Libraries for their ongoing encouragement and generosity to the students of this program. So thank you very much.
The Friends got involved in 2004, and we've always asked members of the organization to volunteer to be a judge. And we've never had any empty spaces around, I assure you. I've had the pleasure of being a judge for about, I think, 3 or 4 times. I think they finally kicked me off and said, "You can't come back again. Let somebody else have a chance." I was having too much fun. But I thought you might like to know and see who our judges were this year. If you'll stand, please. Martha Broom, Melissa Dewar, and Bob Russell. I think they deserve a round of applause. All right, let me pick up these things over here. All the goodies. Okay, I'd like to introduce the scholars, and I'm going to do this alphabetically. Thank you. Okay. The first one is Jeremy Cortez. Jeremy, come on. Jeremy gets a certificate from the Friends that says, "Congratulates Jeremy Cortez for being a McNair Scholar in 2013 and researching the topic, the role of reverse transcriptase domain O in non-LTR retrotransposition." All right, and he gets a very nice plaque to hang on his wall. Isn't that gorgeous? And Jeremy gets a $500 scholarship with it that goes along with it. I think he deserves a round of applause. Our next winner is Bailey Salas. Now you see what I'm doing. Congratulations, Bailey.
Thank you so much.
All right. The Friends of the UT Arlington Library congratulates Bailey Salas for being a McNair Scholar in 2013 for researching the topic. Oh dear. Hang on. There you go.
Quantitative comparison of metastasizing and non-metastasizing breast cancer cell migration via various dimension microchannels.
And you also get a $500 scholarship. Now, if they're looking around for that check, I have to tell you, the money goes directly into their Maverick account for the scholarship itself. So it doesn't come through us physically. It goes directly into the university's bank and scholarship. So thank you both and congratulations. Oh, you can sure tell I was a liberal arts major. Okay. Oh dear. Okay. Now we want to get on with the program that we have tonight, and it is awesome. I want to invite Bob Russell to come up and do the honors for introducing our speakers, please.
Thank you very much, appreciate that. All of us, I think, are somewhat history buffs that are in this group just simply because of whatever. And I know that my interest in history has really peaked in the past 10 or 15 years and really have concentrated on the history of Arlington. So this book is something that I really appreciate having had the opportunity to look at and read. And it's a fun little snapshot of some of the historical things about Arlington. And it's always a pleasure to have people that do things like that, to have the opportunity to listen to them in person. And with that, I'm really pleased to have Lee and Evelyn here. Let me just read a little bio about them so that we've got a little bit of background about who they are. Lee is retired from the University of Texas at Special Collections. Prior to working at UT, she was an electronic resource coordinator for the Arlington Public Library and librarian curator for the Alaska Heritage Library and the Museum in Anchorage, Alaska. Why did you have to leave Alaska? I love Alaska, it's a neat place. Evelyn is the Director of Marketing and Communications at the University of Texas at Arlington Libraries and a past librarian and archivist for the Dallas Historical Society, which sounds like a lot of fun. Together they co-authored The Images of America, Arlington, published in 2011, and co-curated the 2011 UT Arlington Library exhibit, What You Wish the World Could Be, the Early Years of Six Flags Over Texas. And if you saw that exhibit, it was wonderful. It was a great presentation. Really did love that. And they also do the Arlington Time Frames, twice monthly feature in the Star Telegram. And I love reading the Arlington timelines. I think they're fun things to read also. But with that, please, and I don't know who's speaking first. Evelyn.
We're coming up together.
Coming up together, ladies.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting us here tonight. It's always great to speak to the friends. Thank you, Bob, for that great introduction. And congratulations again to our McNair Scholar winners. Okay, at last the day has come. Hope ends in fruition. That was the headline in July 20th, 1876, on the Fort Worth Democrat. And what they were talking about was the train finally arriving in Fort Worth after a 3-year delay. Dallas was doing great because they had the train. They had 2 trains, north, south, east, west. They were doing fine. Fort Worth was dying on the vine because they did not have train service. And the panic of 1873 stalled the train over in Dallas, and it wasn't making its way westward. Finally, the Texas legislature said, get the train to Fort Worth or forfeit the money. So they started building and building quickly. And actually, the crowds of people, they were so eager to get this train to Fort Worth that people would come out with their fried chicken and their boiled hams to feed the workers building those railroad lines. It was so important to them. And reading the headlines from them, it's always fun because it's like, the train is 3 miles away, it's 2 miles away, it's coming. And they were so excited. When the train finally came, they had a huge barbecue. A man named Winfield Scott, not the general, donated a 2,000-pound steer for a community barbecue. And the whole town was invited. And people lined the tracks to watch this train come into Fort Worth. Well, why are we talking about trains in Fort Worth? Because the train going westward is what gave us Arlington. Arlington didn't exist until the train came through. We had Johnson Station, which was well established by that point. But when the train was platting the land for the railroad tracks, the land was easier to grade 3 miles north of Johnson Station. So they came 3 miles north and platted the town that eventually became known as Arlington, named after Robert E. Lee's home in Virginia. And here is a picture of a train in 1896 in Arlington. Now, like many railroad towns, Arlington in the late 1800s, it was a tough place. You know, there's a lot of people coming in, a lot of people trying to build a new life. So it could be a really rough place. It had a lot of saloons. We have one oral history of a woman who remembers when she was a young girl not being able to walk on the south side of Main Street because of all the saloons. So she said it was that way until Carrie Nation came to town and cleaned it up. But we even had gunfights, and the most notorious one happened on December 23rd, 1892, when Harvey Spear and Poker Bill Smith got into it with the Hargrove family. It was over a horse deal that had gone south, and so they were going to meet and settle it once and for all. Well, the Hargroves told Mr. Spear when they were arriving. So Mr. Spear and Poker Bill were at the train station lying in wait, and they saw the Hargroves get off the train. And then the shots started flying. And within about 3 minutes, 25 shots had been fired on this very crowded train platform. And amazingly, the only people who died were the people involved in the gunfight. You know, the women were fainting and the men were going under the seats, forget chivalry. But by the time the smoke cleared, Smith was dead, Spear was dead, one of the sons was dead, and the father died about 2 weeks later. And the only survivor was a man named Walker Hargrove. And since he was the only survivor, he's the one they arrested for the whole thing. But he didn't go to jail, which is shocking. And he actually had quite an interesting career. Hargrove later went to the town of Bowie and became the deputy chief of police. And the Dallas Morning News said that he was very effective at his job. But he couldn't stay out of trouble. He ended in Fort Worth in a bar fight where he got shot over a dispute about the cleanliness of the glasses. So, and the Arlington Journal said he died with his boots on. So, but we had some calmer times too. She got all the good parts. I just want you to know that.
Well, she was alluding to the fact that we had Johnson Station to the south. And that's really where we regard the start of Arlington itself. It was founded by Texas Ranger Middleton Tate Johnson, and he came up here to keep the peace between the Republic of Texas and the Caddo Indians. Once he got here, because he was an entrepreneur, he got land and he started building. He had a stagecoach stop. He had a cotton plantation. He had a post office, and anything to create that little place for people to stop at and to linger on and spend a little bit more money. Well, that place now is down on Park Row, and all you can see is the cemetery there. But during the Civil War, he was against it. He really wasn't for it. But when it came time to go to battle, he supported it. He did recruit some men, but when they didn't elect him as their captain, he went into some more entrepreneurship. He actually contracted with the Ryan brothers, and they decided they would smuggle cotton. And so they were to smuggle 3,000 bales of cotton down to Brownwood. Of course, they needed 300 wagons and 1,800 oxen to get them there, but they continued that until Brownsville was captured in 1863. Another person that we really wanted to talk about, because he's just fascinating, is James Park Fielder. He was born in another state, but as I say, came to Texas as soon as he could. He moved here after the Civil War. Initially, they settled in Fort Worth, he and his wife Mattie, but they did move to Arlington. And they built the Fielder House. Of course, you know that now as a museum. And it looks very lovely, but at the time it was up on a hill, it was visible, and it was the place to be. In fact, your son Robert says that in the evenings, people would sit on the east veranda and they would sit and chat. And of course, at that time, the interurban would go by on Avon Street, so anybody that was coming in and out of town, they could see. And when they came time to leave, Mr. Fielder would go down into his basement and select some produce to send home with him because he had quite a active farm. William Rose is always recognizable because he has a certain way of standing, and he's there in the center of this photograph. And he and his brother Webb were partners in the Rose Brothers Realty Company. And also, he was a little ahead of his time. He hired Floyd Brooks as his secretary to work in his real estate office well before women were hired normally to work in offices. He was elected a mayor on October 1st, 1919, and made many different changes during his term. Most people talk about the sidewalks, so we've got some sidewalks in town. But his family's really proud of the fact that he had the first city charter in 1920. And we had a new water system established. And he was mayor until 1923. Carlisle. He has roots here right on the UTA campus. He was very into education. He was a Texas State Superintendent of Public Instruction from 1889 to 1899. He was proposed to Arlington, being a good man with a canny eye, in June 1902 that he would relocate his private military academy here from Hillsborough if the city would donate the property and build a dormitory, which they did. And they got the Carlisle Military Academy. It was a forerunner, of course, of UTA. It was noted for its high academic and physical standards, and it opened that year. Despite being advertised as a school for manly boys, they did have girls. Often they had them come in when it was low attendance, and so they needed to booster it up a little bit. And it was in operation until 1913. And this is his daughter, and isn't that a lovely photograph? I was so excited when I found it. She started teaching at her father's military academy. In 1904, though, she left to form the Carlisle Smith Institute, and it was a girls' school with her friend Margaret Smith. It only closed after 1 year, so unfortunately didn't have a long run. After the death of her husband in 1921, she returned back to the teaching profession. But she's noted for something that was the start of many of our institutions here in Arlington. She was a founder and charter member of the Shakespeare Club, and they didn't stop at reading Shakespeare. They had an agenda. In 1911, the club helped found the Arlington Forum, the first parent-teachers organization, the Arlington Art Association, and the Arlington Library. And many of these are institutions that I'm very, very fond of. This isn't a person, but it's a personality. And this is our mineral well. It's the heart of Arlington. They decided when they needed to drill a well on Center and Main Streets, and when it came in 1893, it tasted terrible. They wanted drinking water, and all at once they had something that was really bad. In fact, they just let the water run down the street. And finally, it got noticeable that this is mineral well, this is mineral water. During an era when taking the waters, especially in Europe, was the thing to do. So of course, being Arlington, they started bottling it and selling it. This landmark was the heart of so many things. People visiting, chatting. Often the photos show people just sitting on the rim of the well. It was a source of cotton farmers. They would come into town and they'd have their bales of cotton teetering on the back of their wagons, and they come in to meet the train depot, which was right across the street. And they wanted to know what prices were being offered for cotton that day. You mentioned the Prohibition. The Prohibition rally, well, of course, was around the mineral well. And what you're seeing here is a 1943 war bond rally. And you can barely see the Arlington Crystal Building because they had gone from a flowing well to a little building where they sold the things by the bandstand there. It's just all hidden. Movers and shakers are always fun. And we have so many to choose from. Those are those people that kind of give that little boost somehow, getting Arlington going, heralding those things that are necessary. One person that I'm always very fond of because they're part of UTA's history is the Reverend James and Maggie Upchurch. You know, they started in Waco and they were wanting to share their story of salvation with prostitutes. And it became quite obvious. Once you have them in your church, what do you do with them? You need to have a place where you foster and teach them housekeeping, taking care of children, those things that maybe they really needed to do and to know. So, ultimately, he wound up here in Arlington and founded the Baraka Home in 1903. What you're looking at is a beautiful photograph of them on the Purity Journal. Did I mention that he was really great at fundraising? And this is one of the ways he did it with. He sent out the stories of these women and how they were saved, what their life was like before they were saved. And of course that little send money if you want message. And that went on until about 1935. They were hardly hit by the Great Depression and the death of several of their donors.
We do have our favorites, and this is one of mine, Carrie Coleman Rogers. She was definitely a leader and a trendsetter for Arlington from the very first. She was born in Virginia, but came to Texas with her grandfather in 1873. And you know, remember I was talking about the train coming through and the people lining up to watch it. She was one of those people. She stood in what is now Arlington and watched that first train come through. She married Andrew Jackson Rogers, who was a very wealthy merchant, and she became one of the social leaders in the town. She had one of the first swimming pools. She started the Chautauqua movement here in Arlington, and she also did a lot of social work. She was one of the few people who tried to improve the lives of African Americans and women in Arlington. But what really makes her stand out is in 1914, she became the first female city marshal in the state of Texas. And she was nominated to this position because of her many years of civic reform. And so she was very big on cleaning up the city, literally. She would write these little pieces in the newspapers and keep our streets clean. So she was very interested in that. And there's a great story that her great-granddaughter tells about Carrie is the city marshal, and these two guys are drunk in the streets. So she goes out at night to get these guys, and for some reason she has to take them to jail in Fort Worth. So what is she going to do with them? She brings them back to her house, sits them down. She sits one at one end of the hall, the other at the other end of the hall, and says, "Stay." And they do. They stayed there all night, and in the morning she picks them up and takes them to jail in Fort Worth. Now, despite this tough stance, she was only city marshal for 2 months before the mayor and the city commissioners dismissed her, reasons unknown. Which we did. She divorced A.J. Rogers in 1902 and turned to real estate to support herself. And she really flourished in that and stayed active in the city life until her death in 1947. And of course, I think most of us know the man in the center of this photo, Mayor Tom Vandergriff. And of course, the gentleman to the right is J.W. Dunlop. For this entry in our book on Tom Vandergriff, when we were writing this, Mr. Vandergriff had very recently passed on. And so the news was full of his very many accomplishments and achievements. And plus we had mentioned him in our earlier book, Images of America. So we didn't want to rehash everything that had already been said and written. And I was very fortunate to find a great article in the Dallas Morning News. And I mean, I think most of you know the rivalry between Fort Worth and Dallas. So the fact that this was in the Dallas Morning News, I think, says a lot. It was March 24th, 1961, and the Dallas Morning News said that a man named J.R. Shiflett had gone to the city council and petitioned the council that they should give Mayor Vandergriff a $25,000 a year salary for his work. Previously, Vandergriff had been elected in the early 50s, and he had been paid $10 a month that whole time for being mayor. So he was saying that he had done such a great job, he was so unselfish, that he deserved this $25,000 salary. And Vandergrift replied, "I don't want the salary," said His Honor, "and if it is offered, I wouldn't accept it. But it is the most heartwarming gesture ever directed at me." And then the Dallas Morning News goes on to praise Vandergrift, saying that he was worth the money and nobody had a more dedicated mayor. Now think about this. This is 1961. You know, Vandergrift was called the boy mayor. He was only 35 in 1961, and this was before Six Flags. This was before the Rangers. This was before so much of what you think of when you think of modern Arlington. And so I picked this story because I think it really shows the love the people of Arlington had for him, how much of an impact he was already having on the region, and how selfless he was. He served as mayor for 26 years, and that whole time he took $10 a month salary that entire time. And he gave the credit to his father, Hooker Vandergrift, for the, with the car dealership, for being able to allow him to do that as well.
Reverend Robinson, he began his ministry at Mount Olive Baptist Church in 1966, a congregation of only 17. Now when you look at their webpage, they say that they have a ministry of over 10,000 people. Certainly a growth. It was developed and established in 1897, and it's been the heart of the African American community. It's located in about 5 blocks area. If you go down Sanford Street, west of Center, you'll see it in the church in there, and that's where he is. Under Robinson's guidance, the congregation created a lot of services. The Metro Christian Academy, and is now known as the Metro Charter Academy. The Mount Olive Credit Union, certainly needed. The Arlington New Beginnings Elderly Housing Project, and other community programs. The church also successfully supported Elsie Odom's candidacy, first for city council and then as mayor. On July 1992, Arlington renamed Northwest Street, north of Division, as N.L. Robertson Avenue. Dottie Lynn. It was so hard to find a picture of her in repose because everyone I looked at, her mouth was open because she was telling somebody something. And this one I thought was so attractive because she was so vital. She moved to Arlington in 1952. In 1958, she helped open Arlington's first YMCA. In 1966, helped launch something Arlington's very, very proud of, and that's our 4th of July parade. She won a seat in City Council in 1982 and stayed until 2000. And this is despite having breast cancer and a brain aneurysm. She felt her greatest achievement was the spearheading the construction of the western loop of the Green Oaks Boulevard, which was named for her in 1984. Enterprise and Endeavors is the next chapter. And in it we discuss some of those people that did the great building. George W. Hawks. He was known for the way he balanced reporting local news with articles supporting the community. Anytime you read his newspaper, you'll see drives supporting the building of the hospital. Every week they reported something new, or any of the other things that Arlington attempted. He purchased the Arlington Citizen in 1946, and merged it with the Arlington Journal, creating the Arlington Citizen Journal. He later sold it to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And he commented during the ceremony naming the city's main library after him, "Written words are still powerful persuaders."
How many of you went to Caton's Variety Store? Yeah, several of you. Okay. This is Honeycutt Caton, and of course he and his wife Bernie Pearl Caton founded, they had the variety store, and they also had Fluffy Ruffling Manufacturing Company. I just love that, Fluffy Ruffling. And they were a manufacturing company right across from their variety store on Center Street. And Mr. Honeycutt started out as a drummer in the early days, a traveling salesman. And then he settled in Arlington, opened the store, opened the manufacturing business of the children's wear. And his sewing industry became one of Arlington's largest industries, employing 50 individuals on 65 different machines. They marketed the products throughout North America, among them Macy's and Sears and F.W. Woolworth. They closed Fluffy Ruffling they sold it in 1964, and then they closed the variety store in 1969. Here's another man. Now, he may not have lived in Arlington, but nobody can deny his impact on the city. Angus G. Wynn. He was raised in Dallas and graduated from the University of Texas, and then he began as a developer, a real estate developer, and he had a very successful community called Wynwood and Oak Cliff. And based on that, he came to Arlington, and his idea was to build a master planned industrial district, the Great Southwest Industrial District. And it was the first of its kind because it was master planned. It was going to have amenities. It was going to be nice. So, you're building this industrial district and you need money for the infrastructure. So what do? You build a theme park. So that was their idea. Let's build a theme park. We're going to call it Six Flags Over Texas, and the money from that is going to fund the infrastructure. Well, of course, Six Flags took off in its first year and gave the city a national profile immediately. Over 500,000 visitors in the first year, and their year started in August 5th. So it was a very short season that first year, but they reached over 500,000 visitors. And he's shown here at the opening of the 1965 season. So the park opened in 1961, but this is from 1965.
Well, if you were a school teacher in the early 1900s, you had a lot to do. You were responsible for the firewood, for mopping the floors, keeping the blackboards clean, and disciplining the students. And this was despite the fact that there were very few teachers and a lot of very young people here in Arlington, because we were a young community. And ever since then, we've really strived to increase and improve our school system. Among the people are Zeta Mae Workman. She was a charter member of the Council of PTAs. Again, Friends of the Library and Arlington Art Association. You keep hearing these names pop up because there was an active core of people that contributed a lot to us. She was also a civic leader for the March of Dimes and was instrumental in obtaining the Cooper House for the library. In 1958, the City Council and the PTA honored her with the Zeta Workman Day, and they planted trees in her honor. She and her husband were members of the First Baptist Church, where she enjoyed teaching the Bible study classes. The city recognized both of their volunteerism in 2001 with a 10-acre park, and it has a playground, a hiking trail, and sports fields, and it's there today for us to enjoy. John Cookin came to Arlington in 1908 as principal of the high school. They wanted him, because he was well built, to keep order in the rough and tumble school environment. The matter of discipline was a daily, if not hourly, problem. The paddle and the strap were very much in evidence every day, he wrote in his 1941 memoirs. He became superintendent of the Arlington schools in 1913 and stayed on the job until 1939. The Cookin Elementary School opened in 1939 and is the oldest building still being used by the Arlington Independent School District. It's on there on center. It started off as an elementary school, but converted to a diagnostic and materials center in 1976. In 1988, it reopened as a preschool, and today it serves special needs and at-risk preschool students. Vincent Woodbury Grubbs. We owe him a big thanks here at UTA. He was born in Kentucky in 1848 and arrived in Kaufman, Texas with his mother in 1855. While his education was really neglected during that time, he decided later on that it was time to settle down, and he started a law practice after earning a law degree in 1874 and became a judge in 1884. However, throughout his life, he was a social reformer. He was a determined prohibitionist and a vocal supporter of women's suffrage. In 1887, he became interested in industrial or vocational education. His theory was that the current, and at that time, schooling, really made people not want to do labor. It made it seem like something that wasn't really very good to do. And so it left many young men and women ill-suited for the real world. And so he worked tirelessly to convince the legislature and the public of the benefits of vocational education. His efforts led to the creation of my alma mater in 1903 of the Girls College of Industrial Arts in Denton, and is now the Texas Women's University. Success came again with the creation of Grubbs Vocational School in 1917 on the grounds of the Arlington Military Academy, and that's UTA. And it focused on agricultural topics for men and household topics, you knew it, for women. And the photos show women sewing and the young men out there working with the animals. And among the things that are interesting about this time is that their school mascot was the grubworms. And if you want to imagine somebody dressed in a grubworm costume, that would be fun to think of. And that was until 1921. But in 1919, the Grubb students started publishing a monthly campus magazine called The Shorthorn, which is still in publication today. Here you see James Martin, Mike Ditto, and Duncan Robertson. James Martin arrived in 1945 to be principal of the Arlington High School, and he was appointed superintendent in 1955 and held it until 1976. That was a time of great expansion in the Arlington school system. They added 8 elementary schools and 2 present-day high schools, the Lamar and the Sam Houston. Martin High School was named after him in 1982. And Duncan Robinson came to NTAC, that's North Texas Agricultural College, in 1928 and proceeded to do everything, I think. He taught English, he coached the debate team, he organized a literary society, sponsored student publication, and served as a college public relations, publicity, and public information official. He and Dean Davis would go to the cornfields of East Texas to recruit students to keep attendance up. He was remembered for the reading of A Christmas Carol at Christmas time and his imitation of Mark Twain. One of his greater contributions was the starting of an oral history project in UTA.
How many of you got to hear Duncan Robinson do A Christmas Carol? Oh, I'm jealous. I wish I had.
I wish we did.
Everyday Heroes. This was a chapter we wanted to do to note the people who may not have been the big politicians, but who had a lasting impact on the city. And again, this one's not a person, it's a thing. The Texas Masonic Retirement Center, which of course is still in existence, started out as the home for aged Masons in 1911. It's shown here in 1921. Both men and women could reside at the home, which was described in 1911 as spacious, grand, inviting, and fireproof. Very important. Amenities included washstands with hot and cold water in each room, electric lights, and steam heat. And this, of course, is the Eastern Star Home, which opened in 1924. And I have to say, I drive by where the Eastern Star Home used to be every day for the past 10 years, and it was just the house part. And when I saw this photo, I was so surprised at how extensive Eastern Star used to be. It was really surprising to me. It was initially housed children and adults, but eventually became a retirement home for women. And again, when it opened in 1924, the entire town got the day off to come celebrate the opening. I mean, they closed down the schools so that the kids could go to the opening of the Eastern Star Home. It's shown here in 1955. And actually, its last great contribution was housing victims of Hurricane Katrina, refugees that had come up. That was about the last time it was actively used. Königshofen. Is anybody here part of our Sister City program with Königshofen? Oh, have you? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, in the summer of 1951, the city manager of Königshofen, Kurt Zulke, came to visit Arlington. He was traveling with a companion who had some friends here, so they stopped. And he started talking to Gretel Howell about the conditions in Königshofen. Now, at this time, in 1951, Königshofen and Arlington were about the same size, about 9,000 people. And what was happening in Königshofen was, of course, communism was marching westward. So people were fleeing communism to the west, and they were overrunning this town of Königshofen. And the town just couldn't handle the numbers. So he was telling the Howells about this, and they decided to do something about it. They got supplies together and started putting a trainload of supplies to send to Königshofen to help with the influx of refugees. And they did this for about 3 or 4 times during the 1950s until it, kind of settled down a little bit more over there. And it was interesting because not only was this a humanitarian gesture, but it was very much a blow against communism. They were doing this as a way to show, see, we are better than the communists because we help these people. So it had a very dual purpose. But one of the really great things is that friendship, and it eventually equalized. It wasn't us giving aid, it became more of a friendship. And it equalized out over the years. And it's one of the longest sister city relationships anywhere. And I've heard that when you go to Königshofen, they treat you like royalty if you tell them you're from Arlington.
We went with the jazz band.
Oh,
UTA.
wonderful. Uh-huh. Oh, great.
Yeah, we're treated.
Yeah, and they have an Arlington Park there, and of course we have the Königshofen facility here. And we've had the pleasure of meeting a group from Königshofen recently, and it was just delightful. A really close relationship. And of course, we've grown to such a big city, 330,000. And they're still at their little 9,000 Bavarian town. Anybody recognize this place? Rockefeller's, I heard it, yep. Rockefeller's Hamburgers. This was a picture taken in 1953, located on Main Street. It was a very popular hangout place because it stayed open until midnight, which most places did not do. And it was actually part of a chain. And it was a narrow little building. It had one booth in the back. This is one of my favorite guys. This is Will Leatherman, and he was a rural mail carrier for the U.S. Postal Service. Now, before World War II, back in the early 20th century, Arlington was still, of course, very rural, had a lot of farms around it, and so he would go out and deliver the mail. And I learned, researching him, how important he was to these people. I mean, not just delivering the mail, but he may be the only person these people saw for days and days out in this farming community. So, they'd be there by the mailbox waiting for him. They'd want the news of the town. They'd say, hey, can you help me hang that clothesline while you're here? And so he was very much a part of the community. He started with the U.S. Postal Service when he was 17. And at the time, you had to provide your own horse and cart to deliver the mail. And then they kind of went through a fad here in around 1914 where postal carriers got motorcycles. So you can see him on his motorcycle there. It's a Wagner motorcycle. And of course, this is great, but again, rural. When it rained, dirt roads, back to the horse and cart. So he kept that horse and cart for a long time up until the 1920s. And his territory eventually included parts of Grand Prairie, Hearst, Euless, and Bedford. That's how far out he was going. He married an Arlington native named Susie Appleton in 1916, and she died not that long ago. Did anybody know Susie Appleton? Did you? Yeah.
Yes, wonderful.
Amazing. Yeah, she sounds like an amazing woman. So they married in 1916. They would go off on the interurban, which we saw a picture of earlier. They'd go into Dallas, or they'd go to Lake Erie for fun. They'd go to Arlington Downs, which we're going to talk about. And another just interesting factoid is Susie's brother, Ed, was actually our first major league ball player from Arlington. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers while they were still called the Robins. So it was way back in the teens.
Andrew Mahaney created Arlington's pictorial history one shutter click at a time throughout his life as the professional photographer for Arlington. As a young man, he captured on film the old mineral well with its lion heads fountains that once graced the center and Main Streets, took photography, photos of old Arlington towns that have been since torn down, and he snapped the first airplane that came into Arlington, as well as the first interurban to travel down Abram Street. And I think perhaps the greatest gift of all is he took pictures of people in Arlington doing their everyday things in their life. And we have such a wonderful legacy from his photos. I first became aware of him when I became aware of the Dunlop collection. And in fact, at the time, Mahaney was spelled various ways on the front of those photographs, but we finally found the correct way to spell his name. In this photograph, he's 85 years old, and he had retired, and you could see that they have some of his photographs on the bed, and he's looking at them. He actually studied art in Baylor University and studied under D.H. Swartz, which is one of the Fort Worth's early photographers. He opened his first gallery in Central Arlington, and he had to sensitize his own plates and print photos by sunlight. So that's how primitive it was. He never married. He lived most of his life with his mother, and after she died, with family members. He recalled that the pleasure of his life was to see changes that have been brought about and the modern conveniences that have been established. I think that's sort of a good thing to think of in retrospect. This is such a great, dashing photograph of Colonel Neil Kirby. He was a legendary fighter pilot. He led the 348th Fighter Group in the Pacific Theater during World War II. He was born in Wichita Falls, and he spent his formative years here in Arlington. He went to Arlington High School and then attended North Texas Agricultural College, which is now, of course, UTA. He did graduate at the University of Texas at Austin and joined the Air Corps in 1937. He was awarded his medal for destroying 6 enemy aircraft during a single mission in 1943, which is amazing. He was flying a P-47 Thunderbolt. He was credited with at least 22 aerial victories before he was killed in New Guinea in 1944. And the tragic news of his last fight was reported throughout the nation.
I hear recognition in the audience. Okay. Okay, we're going to keep going, but we'll try to get through a little faster. Marshall Morton, of course. And people called him the Little Marshal or the Marshal of Arlington. And some people didn't realize that Marshall was his actual name, not just a title he kind of adopted. And he had been born with some mental challenges, and he was very short. He was 4'10" tall, and people have described him as having a very wizened looking face. But he was very much beloved. He was a fixture here on what was in Arlington State College campus. He would help the girls carry their books to class, and he'd go around during the rounds with the security guards. And then, of course, he would greet the people downtown getting off the bus station. He would do traffic, or in the roundabout, Main and Center Streets, he would direct traffic. And there's more than one story about people thinking he really was a police officer telling them to move along. So he was quite beloved. And especially on the Arlington campus, if there were new kids and they were going to pick on him for some reason, the other kids would be like, you're not doing this to Marshall. He's our guy. So very much beloved by the town. And when he died in 1961, he was still very young, and the Arlington Journal published an editorial called "Arlington Loses a Friend." Jim Hayes is such a legend here on this campus. In the 1970s, people in wheelchairs here at UT Arlington had their choice of majors. Accounting, history, that's it. Because those are the only buildings they could get into in that wheelchair. So Jim Hayes was here, and he challenged the administration of the university to spend a day in a chair and see what they could do. Only one person, Vice President of Student Affairs Wayne Duke, took him up on it. Within 5 minutes, he'd fallen out of the chair, ripped his coat, but he got back in, and Jim Hayes said there was not one building he could independently get into, not one bathroom, not one telephone, not one water fountain. But it made an impact, and even in the 1970s, long before we had the American with Disabilities Act, UTA started making changes to be more wheelchair accessible. Now, of course, now we have our fantastic Moving Mavs wheelchair basketball team. We have the female Moving Mavs now. And that was because of him. And he said, you know, Arlington did it for the right reasons, because it was the right thing to do, not because it was a federal mandate to do. He was the first director for the Office of Students with Disabilities and, of course, the coach of the Moving Mavs. He died in 2008. Okay, Arlington Downs. We had horse racing here in Arlington. And who saw the movie Seabiscuit? Or knows the story, basically. Okay, this guy is Buddy Haas on Tiempo. In Seabiscuit's last race, this guy came in second. So that's his claim to fame. But Arlington Downs gave the town, again, national exposure. It was a top-notch facility, attracted top-notch racing, had a big purse. And it was started by this man, William Thomas Wagner. And it opened in 1929, but pari-mutuel betting was illegal. So he kept lobbying for a while, and they even did a test case where the druggist, Paul Coulter's Drugs, I'm sure some of you remember. So they got Mr. Coulter and another man to go place a bet in front of Sheriff Red Wright with the intention that Red Wright would then immediately arrest them and take them to jail, and they would be the test case. And we have this great picture of them just linked arms, smiling, going out, being arrested from Arlington Downs. They lost. They didn't win the test case, and so Wagner paid all their fees. But we did eventually get pari-mutuel betting in 1933, but it was revoked in 1937, and so then Arlington Downs became a racetrack and a place for rodeos before being raised for Great Southwest Industrial District. Versus Worcester, of course, such a legend here in Arlington, running the dance studio and being in many Casa Mañana productions. And I'm sorry, we're going to go a little bit fast through this end part. Dan Burkholder, did anybody play or work with Dan? Oh, wonderful, Dan Burkholder. And when he came to Intac in 1947, the choir had 12 students. But by 1951, he had the 100 Singing Rebels Choir, which you can see. And he had a really interesting scholarship program. He formed a little band called the Danny Burke Band that would go all over the area, and he would hire the students to play, and so that gave them some spending money that way. Chena Gilstrap. I wish I could have met this guy. I think I found one quote. He had the undefeated football season, 1957, and he led the Rebels to the 2 Junior Rose Bowl victories in 56 and 57. But I love this quote. I think this sums it up. He was a big speaker, high in demand as a dinner speaker. And he said, "Smallest crowd I ever talked to outside my family was at a church dinner," Gilstrap said. "I got there and found tables set for 75 people. 9 showed up. It wasn't so bad, though. They just served dessert 6 times. And we wanted to end with Six Flags Over Texas. Of course, such an icon of Arlington these days, and Vandergrift placed a lot of importance on it. He said, "Arlington's growth and that of Six Flags are tied to one another. They're inseparable." And Arlington's history really began in 1961 when it opened. As I said before, it had an amazing first season. It's continued to grow and add more attractions. This was again in 1965. And I thought that was a good way to end this program. So thank you so much.